So Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul really went at it on the Senate floor over a piece of legislation about Russia. So I'm going to play this clip for you. It's about 4 or 5 minutes long. And I may have a surprising takeaway. Let's watch.
President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Trump derangement syndrome has officially come to the Senate. The hatred for the president is so intense that partisans would rather risk war than give diplomacy a chance. Does anybody remember that Ronald Reagan sat down with Gorbachev and we lessened the nuclear tensions? We need to still have those openings. Nobody is saying or excusing Russia's meddling in our elections. Absolutely. We should protect the integrity of our elections. But simply bringing the hatred of the president to the Senate floor in order to say, we're done with diplomacy, we're going to add more sanctions and more sanctions. You know what? I would rather that we still have open channels of discussion with the Russians. Kennedy, at the height of the Cold War, had a direct line to Khrushchev, and it may have prevented the end of the world. Should we be so crazy about partisanship that we now say, we don't want to talk to the Russians, we're not going to have relations with the Russians? We should stand firm and say, stay the hell out of our elections, but we should not stick our head in the ground and say, we're not going to talk to them. I would like to see the Russians leave Ukraine. I think we could do it through diplomacy. We're not going to have it if we don't talk to them. I would like to see the Russians help more with North Korea, with denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We're not going to have it if we just simply heap more sanctions on and say we're not going to talk to the Russians, and anybody that talks to the Russians has committed treason. For goodness sakes, we have the former head of the CIA, John Brennan, gallivanting across TV, now being paid for his opinion, to call the president treasonous. This has got to stop. This is crazy hatred of the president. This is crazy partisanship that is driving this. For goodness sakes, we don't excuse Russia's behavior in our election, but we don't have to have war. We can still have engagement. We have engaged Russia throughout 70 years while also acknowledging the imperfections of their system, the parts of their system that we vehemently disagree with. The lack of freedom, the lack of human rights, and yet we had open channels of negotiation, open channels of communication. So I could not object more strongly to this. Mr. President, I object.
Mr. President. Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
The senator from Kentucky just told us he wants dialogue with Russia. He wants diplomacy with Russia, that he thinks it's important that we communicate with Russia. I agree. Who disagrees with that? There is not one word in this resolution that suggests that the United States of America should not aggressively engage in diplomacy with Russia to ease the tensions that exist between the two countries. What the senator said is totally irrelevant to what is in this resolution. What this resolution says is we're going to tell Russia, stop interfering in our elections. What this resolution is about is to tell Russia to stop interfering with democratic countries all over the world in their elections. What this resolution is about is saying that we should implement the sanctions overwhelmingly voted by Congress. What this resolution is about is that we will not accept interference with the ongoing investigation of Special Counsel Robert Mueller, and that what this resolution says is the president must cooperate with the investigation of Mr. Mueller. That's what this resolution is about. It has nothing to do with ending diplomacy with Russia at all. So that is just inaccurate, and I would hope that if not today, in the very near future, Republicans will join Democrats and do the right thing in our effort to preserve American democracy. Thank you, Mr. President.
So I hope you're sitting for this one. Rand Paul's right and Bernie's wrong. So he talks about how this resolution that they're discussing increases sanctions. And then he acts like that's not an escalation of tensions. When Rand Paul says, oh, hey, we should lean towards diplomacy and not war, that's hyperbolic in the sense that maybe this new round of sanctions won't lead to war, but that's definitely the direction it's going in. And Bernie acts like, who's against diplomacy? Really, Bernie? Really? You're acting like there aren't people who are against diplomacy when every single time Donald Trump sits down with Vladimir Putin, there's screams of, he's doing treason and he's a traitor and, people are begging him. Trump just did an unhinged tweet against the president of Iran, basically threatening war. And so many of the responses to that tweet, it was people going, yeah, why don't you do this with Russia? So yeah, Bernie, there's a lot of people who don't want diplomacy with Russia. A lot of them. So I don't know why he's pretending like that's not the case. He's being dense on purpose. And then again, if your resolution, among other things, it wants to increase sanctions on Russia, that's a problem. We've already sanctioned the shit out of them, going all the way back to what happened in Crimea. Obama increased sanctions. Trump has increased sanctions, even though, again, this is not something the media likes to talk about. Trump did that because it goes against the narrative of, oh my God, he's Putin's puppet. So what do you want to do? You want to keep sanctioning Bernie? That's not very progressive of you now, is it? I mean, it's really hard to do diplomacy when at the same time you're like, oh yeah, by the way, fuck you, your government, and people who are running it, we're adding more sanctions as I'm going to pretend like I'm an actor for peace here. So that's the first point. Second point is, here's the thing that I can't get over. And again, Humanist Report made this point. It's a great point. Let's say you buy into the most extreme version of the Manchurian candidate Donald Trump Russia conspiracy theory, okay? The biggest claim made is they hacked our democracy and our elections are not secure as a result of Russia. What's the most logical response to that? Simple. Pass a bill that increases cybersecurity for the government, for the RNC and the DNC. Now, the RNC and the DNC are private entities, but you can still do a law that affects them in one way or another, and you can definitely increase cybersecurity for the government. So, a cybersecurity bill, number one. Number two, paper ballots. Paper ballots would ensure that there's no hacking of our democracy. So, it's hard for me to take seriously all of the hysteria on this Russia issue when the solution is not being talked about by the people who say they're most disturbed by this issue. If you're most disturbed by this issue, you should be leading the charge for a cybersecurity bill and a paper ballot bill. But instead, Tulsi Gabbard proposed the paper ballot bill. I don't hear a fucking word from the people who are leading the charge on the Trump-Russia issue. So instead of passing a goofy resolution that's like, we condemn Russia for things and stuff, that's what we do. Instead of doing that and wasting everybody's time, do a bill that actually is relevant and pertinent. And then finally, I can't get through the segment without saying this. Bernie Sanders is going to go out there, argue for this resolution that says, Mr. Putin, stop it. And Donald, you better fall in line for the Mueller investigation. He's going to do this resolution. Are we not even going to acknowledge that the claim against Russia is that they exposed the DNC rigging the primary against Bernie Sanders? And so the leaks allegedly from Russia, the hacking from Russia, exposed corruption and primary rigging. And Bernie's going to go out there and give this speech and not mention what exactly it is that Russia exposed, that he got cheated. I'm trying really hard not to call Bernie a cuck right now, because that's a cuck move. Sure, they exposed that I was cheated and the primary was rigged against me, but I'm going to go out here and carry water for this idea anyway, that it's all wrong and it's all bad and they shouldn't have done that and they shouldn't have shown that I was fucking cheated. And let's wag our finger at Russia all day long instead of proposing real solutions, like, for example, a cybersecurity bill and paper ballots. I don't want to hear another fucking word from the Trump-Russia religion crowd unless and until they lead with cybersecurity and paper ballots, because that's the solution, even if you believe the most extreme version of events. So do me a favor and visit www.shutthefuckup.com And man, how sad is it that I have to do a segment agreeing more with Rand Paul than Bernie Sanders?